So what I've got here is the various incarnations. Let's look at this one, which is the latest version. So I click on that. So this tells you obviously that we're in Excel. Open that file, and this is what happens. So first of all, we're getting a security. We've got to enable content. This is just Excel. I've got the clues up here, and it's got some macros in it, which is why we get that message. So the first thing that happens is we come up to the sort of landing page, and we're asked whether we want to change the end date of the account. So remember that the accounts are going to run from the date of death ultimately to the date of conclusion of the administration, but if you're part way through, you might want to be producing interim accounts, and so you can choose whether you want to change the date to today's date. We haven't got a date of accounts for these at all, so, or we can preserve the date that's in this case not there. So why don't we change the date? Click on that. You can't see anything now, but what you'll see later is that that is the date that's going to appear in the accounts. Now let's have a quick look at this. This is the basic instructions. We've got different coloured cells. That's why we call it bright cell. The cells are bright and they're coloured, and they are cells. It is Excel after all. The colours dictate what you can put in each cell, and as you can see from the list, we can start at the top there, descriptions. So this would be yellow, anything that's a free text, so you might want to put the description of the asset or of the liability, and you've also got the option to put in some comments. Essentially anything where you can see yellow, you can write what you like. Green is going to be a positive cash value. So if you've got an asset which has got you can put the value in there. If you've got a receipt of some cash, that's money coming in, a positive number. So anything which is increasing the value of the estate is green, and anything which is decreasing the value of the estate is red and is a negative number. So you must put minus. It won't do that for you. You must put minus, but you've only got to type minus, and then it'll put the brackets in for you, so that it will look like that throughout the accounts. Brown, being a mixture of green and red, could be positive or negative cash value again. Sometimes you're going to have to think slightly about that. For example, it might be an adjustment to the probate value, it might be a value up, or it might be a value down, so you'll have to just decide what is appropriate in there. Again, if it's a negative, obviously we'll just put minus in front of the date, in front of the number. So then the next one is date, and that's blue. Anything where you see blue, you must put in the date. It's quite accepting of most formats. What it won't accept is the full stop between the day and the date and the date and the year. So you can't put 13.12.2015. You have to write 13/12/2015 or 13-dec/2015, those sort of things. So just play around with that. But if it doesn't come up in a date format, you'll know you put it in wrong. And then finally, orange is you get an option here. It doesn't show on this particular cell, but if you click on the cell, you will get a little there it is, yes, a little drop down arrow. You can click on that, and you can decide which out of those options you want to put. So, for example, this one at the moment is showing home, but if I wanted to say IHT 40-36% calculator, well, this particular one's on a protected sheet, so I can't do anything about it, but you get the idea. On a word on protected sheets, everything is protected, so you can't really do any damage to this. It's just a question of putting in your numbers, your dates, your comments, and then so you don't need to worry too much about whether you're going to muck anything up. What I would also like to show you here is that we've got this next section is what I call the right mouse click, or what I call the bright cell home or shortcut menu, which I'll show you in a moment. But it's got a few features which you may need over and above the home desktop, which we'll look at in a minute. A couple of other pieces of information down there which you might want to have a look at in due course. But that's very basic getting started instructions. So let's see how it actually works. So I'm going to start with, if in doubt, right click your mouse, and what you should see is this shortcut menu. And if we go to Brightsell Home, this is going to take you to the home menu, if you like. What you can see here is it's the control panel for the whole accounts preparation. It's divided into broadly 3 sections. It's not quite that simple, as you'll see, but we've got to the left, we've got pre-grant. This is where we start. Right, this button here is where you put in all of your key data, dates of death, names of executors, shares of residue, and so on. And then you can see that you've got the option to record date of death, assets and liabilities, date of death investments, date of death and chattels. So assets and liabilities is everything except for investments and chattels. And the reason that investments and chattels are on a separate tab is because, as you will know from preparing estate accounts, those often appear in schedules because there's a lot of information and data to include on those with regard to those particular categories of asset. So they're dealt with separately. You can also see here that this is where you would record legacies. Now it's not done on the key data page, but it does. If you go to record legacies, you'll see, we'll look at that in a moment, but you'll see that it will show up various different options, and it will take you to the particular section. So whether it's an ordinary asset or it's an investment or it's a chattel, you can select that, or indeed cash, and Brightsell will take you to the right part of the huge spreadsheet, which it is, just to record those particular legacies. I'm going to come back to overview and inheritance tax, but let's next look at the administration period. So once you've recorded your date of death position, all of that section, if you do accounts in the way that we do them, you'll get all of that completed before you start to draft your inheritance tax account. And what it will then deliver for you is an estate account, that's to say the position at the date of death, which will show exactly the assets and liabilities that you've got, and on one page. And that's very useful when you're sitting down with the executors, because you can simply say this is what the estate comprises, and therefore and it is all included in the inheritance tax account, which we can go through with you if you'd like, or you can take it on trust that it's all in there. But the point is, you will be able to show the total figures in the inheritance tax account all add up to and tally with your estate account. So it's a very powerful tool, and it impresses the executors enormously, because they can just sit there and say, wow, yes, you've really got a grip on everything, and very quickly they can spot from that estate account page what's missing and what's not. We'll look at all the different reports in due course, but that, if you like, is your first section. The next section is the administration period, and here you can see we talk about the various things. This, if you like, is what I would call the middle line, which is where we're just converting one asset into a different type. So it's typically converting assets into cash. Rarely will you be converting cash into assets, but you might, so there is that option. There's also an option to introduce capital if somebody's putting money in. That's where you put that in, but otherwise it's essentially selling assets, and again, investments, chattels are dealt with separately. One point I should make here is that when you are transferring cash, or when you are closing a bank account, it's not actually a conversion of cash into anything else. It's merely a transfer of cash from one account, which might be the deceased's bank account, into, say, your own client account. So anything to do with closing a bank account, those are transfers of cash, and that's what you do there. So then below the line, or if you like, your expenses, what's going to cost you, is going to be, we've got here settling pre-death liabilities. So although that is part of the date of death position, it's under the administration period, because you're obviously only able to deal with that once you have a grant of probate. They're separated out from the recording and paying the administrative expenses, and I think that's just to help you keep a mind on what is pre and post death. That's particularly important, for example, if you've got an insolvent estate, and also it just focuses your mind as to whether where that liability is coming from. You've got the option to pay inheritance tax, and that can either be out of the estate, or if you've got tax payments by legatees who are receiving their legacy subject to tax. So you've got that option there. Option to pay capital gains tax, that's where you pay your capital gains tax, and to pay your income tax. So those are all your outgoings, and then at the top here you've got your incomings, and that's all increasing the value of the estate. So I put that at the top of the column, and that's going to be your income from investments, interest on cash deposits, and other income. So it might be premium bond prizes or rental income and so on. Then to the right, this is where we come to the sort of winding up, really. So once we've reached the end of the administration period, and we can start to do things like make distributions. Now, it's not quite that simple, of course, because you're likely to want to pay your cash legacies before the end of the distribution period, and you're going to want to make some interim distributions before the end of the administration period too. But essentially, this is what is left, and this is how you deal with it. So you can see you can pay cash legacies, or you can pay residuary cash, and those are dealt with separately because, again, they take you to different sections of the account, and you can see what's been paid out to whom much more easily if you're keeping those separate. Distributing chattels, shares, and other assets. So that's the same division, other assets and chattels and shares. Now, what you can also do with that, you can actually, if it's appropriate, you can distribute distribute liabilities as well. So, for example, if you had a property that was going subject to mortgage and you recorded the property at the top of your in the real property section of the estate account, and you've also got as a liability the outstanding mortgage, it is possible to transfer that mortgage to the legatee or indeed to the residuary beneficiary. So that's an option too. Here then is what we call the reports. This is what is going to comprise, this is going to build up all the pages which you're going to actually use in the estate accounts, which are going to go out to the client in due course. And you can see you've got the estate account, capital account, income account, distribution account, etc. And there are your schedules, investments, chattels, administration expenses. You've also got calculations, so you can show your inheritance tax calculation, you can show the grossing up calculation if the inheritance tax is more complicated than the straight tot up everything, knock off the nil rate band and take 40% of what's left. So for example, if you've got partially exempt residue, or you've got agricultural property relief or business property relief, and you've got interaction, or you've got legacies that have been grossed up, that's all going to show on you. You'll probably want to include your grossing up calculation there. CGT calculation, well, there we are, that's pretty obvious. You've also got a section here which is called R185E information, and this will tell you straight away, it doesn't produce your R185s, but it does give you all the information that you need to prepare the R185s, and that breaks that down by tax year, by type of income, and the income that's been deducted, and therefore it gives you the gross figures. So you're getting all the figures which you can plug straight into the R185. So that's particularly useful if you're making distributions from the estate and you come to the end of the tax year. You can very quickly produce those, and you can produce them on the 6th of April if your accounts are up to date. You haven't got to sit down and think, oh my goodness, I'm going to have to do R185 calculations in order for beneficiaries to get those in time to do their own tax returns. Those can go out almost straight away. There are two other buttons here which are particularly useful, I think. The cash balances, which, if you like, that generates your nominal ledgers, and that means that when you come to reconciling your accounts, the job is very easy because all the entries are listed out by account and in date order, and there's also an option to correct those that are wrong. So if in comparing the what you see on Brightsell with the actual true bank account or bank statements, you find that there's a discrepancy. You can very quickly go and change the numbers that are wrong, and then that automatically feeds straight through the account, and because it's Excel, all those calculations are done instantaneously, as good as, and you can very quickly see when you're back in balance. Synopsis, that's just your title page and description of what's happening in the estate. Balance sheet, this is great because you can click this at any time and you will instantly see whether you are balancing. And if you're not, then you can begin to hunt around and find out where the problem is. But it means that at any time, again, you can produce that to the executors. So for example, if somebody's saying, where are we? You can just say, well, let me just click on balance sheet and I can send that to you. So it's an instant balance sheet at any time. So very, very useful. I use that a lot. what I'll say about it is that it is a summary balance sheet. It doesn't go into all the details. So, for example, it will say how much inheritance tax is outstanding, what's the total value of the perhaps the post-death liabilities which haven't been settled, but it won't itemize those. So if you're wanting to do that in detail, you'll have to look elsewhere and compile that information separately. But it does give you the sort of the big picture. So coming back over to these other options here, we talked about overview. This really is one of the things that when I embarked on Brightcell, one of the things that I had seen, which I thought was very useful, was a table which to the left of the table would be your particular asset, and then as you moved across the table you would chart the progress of that asset through the administration. So it would record things like the date on which you logged the death certificate, which we sent the death certificate, the date on which you received your valuation, so if you can see if things are being held up, you can chase them up. Data on which the grant is obtained, the data on which contracts might be exchanged, completion, and so on. So that was a very handy way of seeing, seeing progress, charting progress. So I thought I'd try to create that. In fact, that's quite a big part of what goes on Brightcell. It's part of the sort of whole ethos behind it all. And so these give you an overview, which is going to give you sort of a bigger picture and sort of show you what you've still got and what you've done with regard to those particular classes of assets. Inheritance tax, these are just, I tend to think that inheritance tax is something that runs alongside the administration of an estate, and therefore it's slightly separate from the pure sort of, if you like, well, I tend to think of it as an ongoing and therefore it's a separate subject, but obviously connected. So it's got its own little panel there. And this is where you can put in recording your reliefs and perhaps adjustments. So although Brightcell is going to calculate your tax for you just on the strength of the data that you give it, so you can tell it that there's this asset and it's subject to tax, and it's or this asset that's going to an exempt beneficiary, or the residue is partially exempt, or whatever, and Brightcell will instantly calculate how much inheritance tax is due. There are going to be times when you're not going to agree with the revenue, and so you've got an option there just to adjust your figures there so you do agree with revenue. Also, that's where you would include things like your reliefs for not so much agricultural property relief and business property relief, but things like relief on sale of property within 4 years at a loss, quick succession relief, double tax relief if you've got tax relief from overseas. Then you can just go, that's showing your grossing up calculation, which I think probably does the same thing as the grossing up report. You can also record your aggregable interests, which of course are going to be important in calculating your tax because they're going to steal some of the nil rate band. So you put in there your lifetime gifts and your settlements and so on. And then you've also got the option to show how the interest is calculated. So again, Brightcell will calculate your interest, or it will calculate interest in a way that I believe is correct. But as we all know, HMRC interest calculations are a slight law unto themselves. So again, you've got the option to adjust the interest which Brightcell calculates to match the interest which the revenue are going to charge you. So that's what that does. IHT return data, well, that's a work in progress, I'm afraid, but in due course, what I'm hoping is that we'll be able to present all the data which will go into an inheritance tax return, and who knows, maybe after that it'll be automatic completion of the inheritance tax return, but let's wait and see. So that is the home page in a nutshell, and I hope that that is clear.